17 seconds. That is the documented average duration of a close-quarters engagement involving Gurkha soldiers in the Kabul operations of 2011 and 2012. According to after-action analysis compiled by British military liaison officers embedded with ISAF, 17 seconds from first contact to resolution, not suppression, not disengagement, resolution, somewhere inside Joint Special Operations Command's sprawling intelligence apparatus, a network that in 2011 consumed approximately $19.2 billion annually and employed more than 100,000 personnel across 17 agencies. A staff officer wrote a memo. The precise wording has never been declassified. The substance, however, has been described by multiple veterans in interviews and in the written record with sufficient consistency that its central argument is not in serious doubt. The memo assessed that in the evolving Kabul operational environment, hand-to-hand and short-blade engagements were an anachronistic concern. Urban warfare had evolved. Detection ranges, standoff distances, and the proliferation of body armor among insurgent elements had rendered close-quarters combat a statistical edge case. The data, the memo argued, supported this conclusion. The data was correct. The data was also entirely wrong. On the night of the 14th of September 2011, a patrol from the 1st Battalion Royal Gurkha Rifles was operating in a sector of Kabul that had been formally assessed, as low kinetic. The patrol was approximately 800 meters from their vehicle baseline when contact occurred. What followed in the next 4 minutes and 11 seconds would be referenced in 3 separate military academic papers and discussed in closed sessions at the Royal Military Academy Sandhurst, and quietly prompted a review of force-on-force doctrine at a level several pay grades above the officer who wrote that memo. Nobody told the Gurkhas that hand-to-hand combat was a statistical edge case. The Gurkhas were busy to understand what happened on that street in Kabul and why a JSOC Memo's confident dismissal of close-quarters infantry doctrine became a document that career officers would subsequently describe using language not suitable for publication. You first need to understand the institution you are dealing with. The Brigade of Gurkhas is not a special operations unit in the formal doctrinal sense. It does not carry the designation. It is not recruited from existing infantry pools and selected through the attrition-based processes that produce operators at Hereford or at Fort Bragg. It is something older, something more structurally peculiar, and in certain operational contexts, something considerably more dangerous than its formal classification suggests. The Gurkha recruitment relationship between Nepal and the British Crown dates formally to 1815. The Treaty of Sugauli, which ended the Anglo-Nepalese War and established the terms under which Nepalese soldiers would serve in the armies of the East India Company, and later the British Crown directly. 211 years of continuous service, 37 Victoria Crosses, 13 George Crosses, a regimental lineage that survived partition, the end of empire, 2 world wars, the Falklands, the Gulf, the Bosnia, Sierra Leone, Iraq, and Afghanistan, with its institutional character not merely intact, but reinforced by each successive test. The standard British Army infantry recruit begins training at the Infantry Training Center at Catterick. The course runs for 24 weeks. It is physically demanding and produces competent, deployable soldiers. Gurkha recruits selected at the Brigade Depot in Pokhara, Nepal, have already passed through a selection process that begins approximately 18 months before they set foot on British soil. In the year 2011, approximately 28,000 young men from the hill regions of Nepal, primarily from the Magar, Gurung, Rai, and Limbu communities of the Middle Hills, traveled to regional selection camps to compete for approximately 230 places. By that is a selection ratio of roughly 121 candidates per available position. For comparison, United States Army Special Forces Group Selection, a program drawing from an existing pool of trained, fit, combat-experienced soldiers, runs at an attrition rate of between 60 and 70% from a pre-screened candidate pool, which itself represents a fraction of the broader Army population. The Gurkha system achieves a comparable selection density before the formal military training has even begun. The physical benchmarks at Pokhara selection are not conventional. The Doko race, named for the traditional wicker carrying basket used by hill farmers throughout Nepal, requires candidates to carry a 25-kilogram load up a gradient of approximately 400 vertical meters within a specified time. The course covers 5 kilometers of mountain terrain. Candidates who complete it within the qualifying time advance. Candidates who do not go home to the hills and try again next year if they are still young enough. The upper age limit for Gurkha selection is 17 years and 9 months. You do not get many second chances. The 230 who pass travel to the Infantry Training Center at Katarik and then to the Gurkha Company at the ITC, where they undergo a 44-week training program, 20 weeks longer than the standard British infantry course. By the time a Gurkha soldier is badged and posted to his battalion, he has spent more time in formal military instruction than the majority of soldiers he will serve alongside, and he arrived at that training having already survived a selection process that eliminated 99.2% of applicants. None of this is the interesting part. The interesting part is what that selection process is actually selecting for, and why it produces soldiers who operate in close quarters environments in a manner that caused a JSOC staff officer's formal assessment to become, within operational circles, something approaching a dark joke. The British Army, to its considerable credit, does not traffic extensively in mythology about the Gurkhas. The regiment's public affairs output is measured, professional, and institutional in character. Veterans who have served alongside Gurkha soldiers are somewhat less restrained. Brigadier James Ellery, who served with Gurkha units during the 1995 Bosnia deployment and whose subsequent writings on small unit effectiveness have circulated within British Army training doctrine circles, described the force multiplier effect in terms that avoided sentimentality. The Gurkha soldier does not require a supervisor to maintain operational tempo under stress. That is not a cultural description, it is an engineering specification. That engineering specification begins in the selection environment itself. The hill districts of Nepal from which the brigade draws its recruits are not simply geographically demanding. They are socially and economically structured around the idea that the Gurkha service is a generational institution, a family profession, a form of structured excellence with known entry requirements and known rewards. Boys who intend to apply begin preparing physically at age 12 or 13, not informally, systematically. Training regimens, running distances, load-carrying protocols, these are discussed, refined, and passed between families across generations as practical knowledge. A 16-year-old arriving at Pokhara for his first selection attempt has frequently been training specifically for that event for 3 to 4 years. His father may have served. His uncle almost certainly has an opinion about the Doko race. What this creates and what Western military psychology has increasingly recognized as a genuinely distinct performance substrate is not simply physical fitness. It is what researchers at the Defense Science and Technology Laboratory, in a 2016 review of Gurkha operational performance data compiled from Afghanistan deployments between 2006 and 2014, described as pre-institutional psychological preparation. The candidate arrives with the mental architecture of a soldier already partially constructed. The military training does not build the foundation, it builds on one that already exists. Now place this soldier in Kabul, 2011. The capital had been a controlled operational environment since the collapse of the Taliban government in late 2001. Nearly a decade of security layering, intelligence accumulation, and force-on-force adjustment. By 2011, ISAF's footprint in Kabul included approximately 31,000 international military personnel, supported by an Afghan National Security Force presence of roughly 22,000 in the capital region. The intelligence infrastructure was, by any measure, extraordinary. The National Geospatial Intelligence Agency had satellite coverage of the city to sub-meter resolution. Signal intelligence assets operated on a near-continuous collection cycle. Human intelligence networks, cultivated at considerable financial and human cost across the preceding decade, penetrated multiple layers of the insurgent structure. The insurgents adapted. By 2011, the Haqqani network, the primary operational threat within Kabul's urban environment, had developed a methodology specifically calibrated to exploit the detection thresholds of the ISAF intelligence system. Small cells, minimal electronic communication, physical dead drops over digital messaging, couriers on foot rather than vehicles, operational planning conducted in locations with no electronic signature. The network had, in effect, reverse-engineered the gaps in a $19.2 billion surveillance architecture and built its operational methodology around those gaps. What cannot be reverse-engineered cannot be detected by satellite. And does not generate a signal for collection is two men in a concrete alleyway at 02:14 in the morning. This is the operational environment into which the 1st Battalion Royal Gurkha Rifles deployed. The battalion had arrived in theater in April 2011. Their area of operations in Kabul covered approximately 47 square kilometers of mixed-use urban terrain, commercial districts, residential compounds, market areas, and a significant volume of what urban operations doctrine designates as layered vertical terrain. Multi-story buildings, rooftop access routes, and subterranean infrastructure, including drainage channels and utility corridors that created movement options invisible to aerial surveillance. The battalion's close-quarters battle training was not undertaken at Kabul, so it had been built over the preceding 18 months at their home base and in a dedicated CQB facility that had been specifically upgraded following lessons extracted from the 2010 Helmand deployment. The facility included a 600-square-meter kill house with reconfigurable room and corridor layouts, low-light simulation systems, and a dedicated blade work and grappling program that had been integrated into the pre-deployment training cycle in direct response to the Helmand experience. That blade work program is worth examining in some detail because it is central to understanding what the JSOC Memo failed to anticipate. The kukri, the curved forward-weighted blade that is the formal weapon and regimental symbol of the Gurkha soldier, has a blade length of approximately 36 to 40 centimeters, a spine thickness at the thickest point of roughly 10 millimeters, and a total weight of between 0.5 and 0.9 kilograms depending on pattern. It is not a fighting knife in the conventional infantry sense. It is an agricultural and utility tool that has been adapted to combat application over centuries. The forward-weighted geometry of the blade means that the cutting force at impact is substantially amplified relative to a conventional straight blade of the same mass. The physics are similar to a small axe rather than a knife. The pre-deployment training program at the battalion level incorporated approximately 64 hours of formal instruction in blade deployment across the final 8 months before deployment. including close quarters integration with rifle transitions, grappling breakaways, and two-on-one defensive scenarios. For comparison, the average U.S. Army infantryman receives approximately 4 hours of combatives training per month in a garrison environment, and that training is predominantly Gracie system ground grappling rather than stand-up, transition-to-blade methodology. This is not a criticism of American infantry. It is a description of a different doctrine built for a different operational assumption set. The assumption that close quarters sub-5-meter engagements were a diminishing operational requirement in an urban environment like Kabul was not unreasonable given the available data. The majority of kinetic engagements in the city were occurring at ranges between 50 and 400 meters. Vehicle-borne IED events, rocket attacks on infrastructure, and ambush contact at distances that placed the premium on fire and maneuver doctrine rather than blade retention. The JSOC assessment was reading the correct data. The Gurkha pre-deployment training team apparently had read a different data set. Between April and September 2011, the 1st Battalion Royal Gurkha Rifles conducted 247 documented foot patrols within their Kabul operational area. Of those patrols, 31 resulted in contact events of some form. Of those 31 contact events, 6 involved what military reporting designates as close quarters friction, engagements at distances of less than 25 meters, where primary weapons were either not deployable or were transitioned away from before the engagement resolved. That is a rate of approximately 19.4% of all contact events involving close quarters application. Now, in a city of 3.4 million people, with 31,000 ISAF troops in theater, in a conflict environment assessed as lower kinetic than the Helmand Valley, 19.4%. The memo had assessed this category of engagement as a statistical edge case. The Gurkhas were having a different experience. On the night of September 14, 2011, a 4-man patrol led by a corporal whose name has been withheld at the request of the Ministry of Defense was conducting a routine presence patrol in a market district approximately 4.3 kilometers from their forward operating base. The patrol was on foot carrying standard rifle configuration, SA-80A2 with SUSAT optic, plus personal protection equipment totaling approximately 22 kilograms per man. Standard load, standard route, standard assessment, low kinetic sector, no intelligence indicators of planned activity. The contact occurred in an alleyway approximately 3.2 meters wide, running between 2 market buildings at 0214 local time. The patrol had been tracking movement sounds from approximately 40 meters ahead for about 90 seconds before the contact crystallized. Not long enough to call for support. Not the right geometry to deploy rifle fire without risk of over-penetration into the residential compound 8 meters beyond the far end of the alley. Not enough light. Ambient illumination in that alleyway at 0214 was approximately 0.003 lux, below the effective range threshold for standard SUSAT optics without night vision, which the patrol had but which required a transition time of approximately 4 seconds to acquire and raise. 4 seconds is an enormous amount of time at 2 meters. The patrol's corporal made a decision in approximately 0.8 seconds, documented through the after-action debrief and reconstructed from the testimony of the other 3 patrol members, to transition to short blade. The decision was not panic. It was not improvisation. It was the application of the specific trained response to a specific tactical geometry that the battalion's pre-deployment program had spent 64 hours constructing. What followed lasted 4 minutes and 11 seconds. The after-action report covering the engagement of September 14th 2011 runs to 34 pages in its unredacted form. A redacted version was circulated within the ISAF Land Component Command's Lessons Learned system approximately 6 weeks after the event. 3 paragraphs from that report have been quoted, in various forms and with varying degrees of fidelity, in subsequent academic and professional military literature. The most striking passage, reproduced in its approved form in a 2013 British Army Review article by Major Tim Biddulph, reads as follows. The engagement lasted from first visual contact to complete resolution approximately 4 minutes 11 seconds. During this period, 4 patrol members were engaged by a minimum of 6 and a possible 7 insurgent personnel in a confined space approximately 3.2 meters in width and 18 meters in length. Rifle fire was discharged on 4 occasions, all by patrol members for a total of 11 rounds. No patrol member sustained a gunshot wound. The after-action assessment attributed this outcome primarily to the speed of transition, the effective denial of engagement distance to the insurgent element, and the specific close quarters instruction undertaken during pre-deployment training. Read that again. 6, possibly 7 insurgents, 4 Gurkha soldiers, an 18-meter alleyway, 11 rounds fired, no friendly casualties. The report does not sensationalize this. It does not use the language of mythology or the vocabulary of the regimental hagiography that surrounds the brigade's public image. It uses the language of lessons learned documentation, passive voice, operational terminology, attribution to training methodology. It is written in the administrative grammar of institutional military reporting. It still reads like something that should not be possible. The corporal leading the patrol received a mention in dispatches for his actions that night. Not a conspicuous gallantry cross, not a military cross, a mention in dispatches, the lowest level of formal recognition in the British honors system, awarded for acts described as mentioned in official reports, for meritorious service in the face of the enemy. The restraint of that citation is, in its own way, a kind of institutional joke. It is the British Army's equivalent of describing a supernova as a notable celestial event. The corporal, in his post-incident interview, said the following when asked to describe his decision-making in the alleyway. There wasn't a decision. The training runs. You get out of the way of it. That sentence is worth holding for a moment. The training runs. You get out of the way of it. This is not the language of instinct in the mystical sense that military mythology often deploys it. This is the language of a man describing what happens when trained procedural memory is stress-inoculated to the point where it operates below the threshold of conscious deliberation. When the cognitive load of the environment, darkness, confined space, multiple threats, weapon transition decision, exceeds the available bandwidth of conscious processing, the trained response bypasses the bottleneck entirely. The body executes, the mind observes. Sports psychology calls this flow state. Military psychology calls it automaticity under load. The Gurkha training system, which has been refining its methodology across generations without the benefit of peer-reviewed papers or sports science consultants, calls it Tuesday. The wider operational context of those months amplifies the significance of this single engagement. Between April and December 2011, the 1st Battalion Royal Gurkha Rifles was involved in 31 documented contact events. They sustained 7 wounded in action casualties across the entire 8-month deployment period. For comparison, a comparable size American infantry battalion deployed in Kunar province during a similar period in 2011, a province assessed as considerably higher kinetic than Kabul, reported 23 WIA casualties in a 7-month period. The differential is not explained by threat environment alone. The Kabul operational area was not a benign posting by 2011. The September attack on the British Council in the Wazir Akbar Khan district, which killed 8 people and involved a complex attack methodology, including suicide vest deployment and armed assault, occurred approximately 2.1 kilometers from the battalion's operational boundary. The environment was not low risk. The battalion's casualty rate was simply unusually low. And then there is the memo. The JSOC Memo has never been publicly identified by document number, sender, or date. Its existence is attested to by veterans and defense analysts who have described its contents in sufficient consistency over sufficient time that its substance is not seriously contested within informed circles. What is known, and what is genuinely extraordinary in retrospect, is that it circulated at a level sufficient to influence training prioritization decisions within certain elements of the broader coalition special operations community. Not universally, not conclusively, but sufficiently that several after-action reviews from the 2011 to 2013 Kabul period reference a doctrinal gap between the training frameworks of different coalition partners regarding close quarters sub-primary weapon engagement categories. The phrase doctrinal gap in military reporting is the bureaucratic equivalent of a slow exhale. One former JSOC officer, speaking to journalist and author Sean Naylor for his 2015 book Relentless Strike, The Secret History of Joint Special Operations Command, described the broader challenge of institutional adaptation in the following terms, not in reference to this specific memo, but in the context of the wider question of whether the JSOC system could adapt its doctrine as rapidly as the threat environment demanded. The system is brilliant at optimizing for the last fight. The problem is the enemy is already planning the next one. The Haqqani network, by 2011, had been planning for exactly the kind of sub-electronic, sub-5-meter engagement geometry that the JSOC memo had categorized as marginal. The Gurkhas, by institutional history and by the specific training investment of the prior 18 months, had been preparing for it too. They were preparing for the same fight, from opposite sides. Only one of them had a memo suggesting it wasn't worth preparing for. 17 seconds. That number from the opening of this account has not changed. It has not been explained away. The average documented close quarters engagement duration for Gurkha soldiers in the 2011 to 2012 Kabul deployment period remains 17 seconds from first contact to resolution. In 17 seconds, a chess game that takes 90 minutes to understand takes place in full. In 17 seconds, the entire argument about what kind of soldier, what kind of training, and what kind of institutional philosophy is relevant to modern urban warfare is made, answered, and archived. The memo is not the story. The memo is the frame around the story, the frame that makes visible, by contrast, what is actually being looked at. The broader argument embedded in that JSOC assessment, that technological capability, intelligence density, and standoff engagement systems had structurally marginalized the close quarters, high lethality light infantryman, was not an unreasonable argument in 2011. The evidence base that supported it was real. Coalition forces had, by that point, invested approximately $140 billion in the Afghanistan campaign across a decade. The intelligence architecture alone represented a genuine civilizational achievement in surveillance technology. The special operations forces that JSOC directed were, by any objective measure, the most capable targeted killing apparatus in human history. The argument that the future of warfare lay in that direction, long-range precision, persistent surveillance, targeted elimination, was not foolish. It was simply incomplete, because the Haqqani network did not receive the memo. and the Taliban commander who planned the alleyway geometry of a Kabul contact engagement did not consult the NGA satellite schedule before deciding where to position his people. And the insurgent cell that operated in sub-electronic communication discipline, moving by foot through drainage channels at 100 hours, was not visible to a signals intelligence system calibrated for radio traffic and mobile device emissions. The capability gap was not in the American system. The gap was between the American system's extraordinary performance against the threats it was designed to detect, and its structural blindness to the threats it was not. The Gurkha Brigade's institutional answer to this problem is not a tactical innovation. It is not a doctrinal breakthrough. It is something considerably older and considerably harder to replicate. It is the decision, made and remade across 2 centuries of service, to select for a specific type of human being in a specific way, to train that human being with a specific seriousness about the complete range of environments in which he might be required to operate, and to continue doing so regardless of whether the prevailing doctrinal consensus considers every element of that training immediately relevant. The 64 hours of blade work training invested in the 1st Battalion's pre-deployment program cost, at the fully loaded training rate, including instructor time, facility costs, and training support, approximately £47,000. The after-action documentation of the September engagement alone, the staff time, the report preparation, the lessons learned dissemination, cost more than that. The training that resolved the situation cost less than the paperwork that described it. The selection process that identified the corporal who led that patrol, the entire Pokhara process, the Doko race, the 28,000 applicants, the 18 months of administrative infrastructure, consumed approximately £2.3 million per annual intake cycle when assessed against the brigade's total recruitment and processing costs, as reported in MOD budget documents. For 230 soldiers, £10,000 per selected recruit before a single day of military training has been delivered. You can spend $42,000 on a helmet. You can spend $400,000 on a missile. You can build a $60 million command and control node with redundant satellite uplink and an intelligence fusion cell that processes 14,000 data points per hour. All of that is real. All of that matters. None of it is present at 02.14 in a 3.2 meter alleyway with 0.003 lux of ambient illumination and 4 seconds of transition time. What is present in that alleyway is a corporal from the hills of Nepal, aged 23, who has been preparing for this moment since he was 13 years old, who has carried a 25-kilogram load up 400 meters of mountain gradient faster than 99.2% of his peers, who has spent 64 hours in a kill house learning not to think about what to do next, who said when asked to describe his decision-making that the training runs and you get out of the way of it. The JSOC Memo was not wrong about the direction of warfare. The future of conflict is long-range, data-driven, and networked. That trajectory has only accelerated in the 12 years since those Kabul patrols. Drone warfare, AI-assisted targeting, persistent ISR coverage. The memo's underlying logic is being vindicated at scale every day in every active conflict zone on Earth. The memo was wrong about the edge cases, and the edge cases are where soldiers die. The Brigade of Gurkhas has not changed its selection criteria in response to the evolution of modern warfare. It has not adjusted the Doko race to reflect the diminished relevance of mountain load carrying in an era of rotary wing insertion. It has not reduced its close quarters training hours because the statistical majority of engagements occur at standoff distance. It has not consulted a memo about what the data suggests is no longer worth preparing for. It has continued to select the most physically resilient, psychologically prepared, institutionally motivated young soldiers it can find from a pool of 28,000 applicants in the hill districts of Nepal, train them for longer than any comparable British infantry program, and send them into the precise environments where the gap between the intelligence picture and the operational reality is widest and most lethal. The memo aged horribly. The Gurkhas have not aged at all. There is a particular kind of institutional arrogance that is only visible in retrospect. It does not look like arrogance at the time. It looks like analysis. It looks like data. It looks like the reasonable application of pattern recognition to a changing operational environment by people who are not fools and who are working with the best available information. The JSOC Memo was not written by an idiot. It was written by a very capable staff officer, reading a very accurate picture of a very specific slice of reality. The slice of reality that the picture did not include was a 3.2-meter alleyway at 2:14 in the morning with no ambient light and no signal to collect and no satellite with sufficient resolution to matter and no intelligence fusion cell with the processing speed to intervene. 17 seconds. The number that opened this account is also the number that closes it, because the number has not moved. What has moved is your understanding of what it represents. It does not represent aggression or mythology or the cultural martial tradition of the Nepalese hill communities, though all of those things are real, and all of them contribute to the environment in which that capability was grown. What it represents, stripped of everything else, is the consequence of refusing to believe that any category of threat is too marginal to prepare for. The oldest military institutions in the world are old because they made that refusal a principle before anyone told them to. The newest ones are still writing the memos.